Why is America like this? Why are Americans like this? It is no coincidence that I'm recording this video on the eve of the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Those attacks and the aftermath actually go a long way toward explaining why America is the way it is in 2025. I'm going to try to explain it, but the short version is that many, if not most Americans, have a secret, usually unspoken fear, which can be summed up as, what if America just doesn't work? And I don't mean the common opinion of what if we have strayed from our ideals, or what if this wonderful country has gone wrong somewhere along the line. I mean, the fear is, what if the ideal version just doesn't work? 9/11 struck right at the heart of that. I'm going to try to explain why. Now, I think every generation has their 9/11, and I don't just mean a terrible thing that happens that they were able to watch happen live. I mean specifically a terrible thing that happens that makes them doubt the future, makes them doubt that the world works the way they thought it did. Well, for somebody my age, our 9/11 was 9/11. The hardest thing to explain to a young person who either wasn't around for 9/11 or just doesn't remember it very well is the context, because that's the part that's hard to convey if you weren't there. It's the same problem I had when I was a teenager. I didn't understand at the time why we were so obsessed with Vietnam. I was raised in the aftermath, but it seemed like every other film was about that war, and I didn't get why it was such a big deal. And you wouldn't have gotten it unless you had lived during the post-World War II years to understand why that war was such a gut punch to the culture. Likewise, you don't get why 9/11 was so traumatizing to the culture unless you're around in the 90s. There's a post that will go around once a month or so on Reddit and other platforms where somebody will point out how weird 1990s era movies are, specifically the movies from 1999. All of the movies about how the worst thing that can happen to you is that you reach adulthood with a comfortable, well-paying office job. These are films like American Beauty and Fight Club and Office Space. And people will post those saying, did they not know how good they had it at the time? But you don't understand the 90s unless you're around for the Cold War. And I realize I just keep going further and further back in time. I promise this is as far as we're going to go. But if you're somebody around my age, like Gen X, you grew up in the 80s doing nuclear war drills once a month at school, where you would either have to hide under your desk or go to a section of the building that was their designated fallout shelter. People used to have bomb shelters in their backyard. Like, as a child, you had actual instructions and guides on what to do when the world ended. Not if, when. So when the Cold War abruptly ended in 1990, 1991, when you saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was this decade-long period of mostly peacetime when it was a relief, but also the whole culture was kind of like, well, what now? Rock music from that era was from this grunge scene in Seattle, and all of the music was depressing. It was the first time you saw rock songs about trauma and sexual assault and child abuse. And by the late 90s, yeah, you had these films that were basically asking, what is the point of all of this? What do we stand for as a culture? I mean, in Fight Club, Tyler Durden just makes that speech right to camera, bemoaning the fact that they don't have a grand struggle in their lives. They don't have a big war to fight. So what's the thing you're getting out of bed every day for? Just consumerism? Just to buy more stuff? And then another film that year, The Matrix, explicitly was saying that this peacetime comfort you're all enjoying, this is an illusion, that you are slowly being drained of your spirit. It was this decade of very anxious introspection, and it really did seem like the entire time the United States had been a superpower, we had always had one enemy we could focus on. And if you have that, you kind of don't have to examine yourself, because when you ask what is America's purpose in the world, it was always, we are here to beat back the darkness of authoritarianism. That you have these forces out there like the Soviets who don't believe in a free press. They don't believe in individual freedoms. There, the accused don't get a fair trial. You're not allowed to protest the government. Reporters are not allowed to uncover scandals. And we had kind of oriented our entire society around the Cold War for as long as most of us could remember. A lot of the weird, like overt symbols of patriotism you would see, like when we would make kids stand up and do a pledge of allegiance to the flag, those were Cold War era things. Putting the phrase, "In God we trust" on the money, that was done in response to the Cold War because the Soviets were godless. We only went to the moon to spite the communists. I would compare it to like in the Batman movies where the Joker makes some monologue about how, well, without me, you're nothing. You exist to fight me. And if I go away, you're going to need somebody else to replace me. Well, that's what that's referencing. That's written by people who experienced this. You have to understand, it's not just that we had a rival superpower. So we had a rival superpower that seemed in perfect opposition to all of the things that we thought made our country special. We all learned in elementary school, if you ask, what's the one thing that makes the United States special and unique? We had one word as an answer, which is freedom. The right to not be oppressed by your government over how you worship or what you say or how you live your life. And then 9/11 happens. And I am not saying that the attack was a relief to anyone, or that people were openly saying, thank God we have an enemy to unify against so that we will stop tearing each other apart. What I will say is that these days people keep asking, why is America so divided? But I can remember two distinct periods when America wasn't actually divided, at least not on this scale. You know how every single one of our presidential elections is like razor close, where if 50,000 people had changed their votes, the other guy wins? Okay, I remember an election where one guy won 49 of the 50 states. It was in 1984. It was Ronald Reagan, and he won because we were in the absolute apex of the Cold War. Everything was coming to a head, and everybody rallied around that cause. The second period of unity was right after 9/11, where the approval rating for that president, George W. Bush, went up into the 80s, a number that is unthinkable these days. And if you didn't know any better, you would say, actually, these terrorists, they make for the perfect new enemy. They are in opposition to everything we believe. These guys don't believe in reason or science or democracy. They don't even believe that women should be able to vote or get an education. They definitely don't believe in freedom of religion or freedom of expression. The propaganda case seems extremely easy to make, and in the beginning, we did make it. We are the high-minded, enlightened, modern people. They are the savages who want to drag us back to the Dark Ages. We are, we thought, the people who carefully avoid civilian casualties in warfare. They're the ones who intentionally target the weakest. They specifically go after the unarmed, the women, the children. But very quickly, you started to hear something strange, which is talking about how in order to beat these guys, we're going to have to become more like them. Now, to be absolutely clear, nobody phrased it exactly that way. But there was something unnerving about the way the attack was carried out because, after all, they did this with knives. And after the attack, please understand, nobody thought this was going to be a singular event. We thought this is what the world is going to look like from now on. There will be a new plane hijacked every month. There will be another suicide bomber in a shopping mall every week, because it seemed like they had found the weakness in our system, that they had exploited the fact that as a society we are too soft or permissive. In other words, what if these people have just proven that America just doesn't work? And almost everything they suggested that we needed to do to fight these guys was to take us further away from these principles. Things like the rights of the accused. If somebody's accused of terrorism, well, that's not a crime. That's actually an act of war. Even if they are a citizen, they shouldn't be arrested. They should be taken out. And sure, they said, we have a right to worship however you want, but if these people are worshiping a god that asked them to commit acts of terror, well, then that's not really the same thing. And sure, they said, we have freedom of speech and freedom of expression. That's central to who we are. But if somebody is out there saying things that stirs up more terrorists or undermines the government's ability to fight this war, which threatens our very civilization, Well, that's different. And you started to hear people expressing this idea that you still hear right now. You will probably hear it on YouTube in the next video you watch. The implication that all of these rights and individual liberties, this stuff is all well and good during peacetime when everything is fine, but that they need to be set aside when there's a true threat around. As if the founding fathers who wrote up these principles were not themselves under threat in the middle of a war. I would like to think, if you're somebody who watches my videos, I don't have to explain this, that the whole purpose of declaring certain rights to be sacred is specifically so that you're not tempted to do away with them when you're in a period of danger. But this kind of response to the crisis was not surprising, and it is not new. For example, for my entire life, right up to the present day, most of the most popular action movies are about vigilantes. I mean, superhero movies are about vigilantes. It's obviously against the law to do what Bruce Wayne does when he dresses up as Batman. Everything the Avengers do is against the law. It is illegal to use a web that you shot from your wrist to climb up a skyscraper. That is trespassing. But even before superhero movies were all the rage, when I grew up, it was all of these crime movies about either loose cannon cops who didn't play by the rules, or private detectives who solved crimes that the cops couldn't, or just some sort of a vigilante who's a regular guy like the Death Wish series. So you will routinely see some vigilante character do a search of a suspect's house without a warrant. You will see them torture a suspect without them having an attorney present. And we as the audience are meant to watch that and cheer it on and say, yeah, of course, all of those rules, that stuff just gets in the way. When you really need something done, you're going to have to set all that aside. But that is literally saying that America just doesn't work. Because please understand, if there are no rights for the accused, even a truly terrible accused person, then none of the other rights matter. You've created a world where if the government doesn't like what you said or what God you worship, they can just make you disappear and claim you are guilty of a crime. If you don't have a right to a fair trial, if you don't have a right to face your accusers, if that is not a transparent and public process, then yeah, they can just make you disappear if they don't like that you protested the government or that you tried to run against one of their candidates. All they have to do is make up some kind of a terrible crime. And if there's no transparency to the process, then that's it. None of your other rights are worth the paper they're printed on. But that has always been this incredibly appealing fantasy of what if we had a very powerful person who could go out and just solve all of our problems directly, regardless of what the rules say. Now, because this video is about 9/11, you'd think I'm now going to talk about all of the abuses that occurred, CIA torture sites and the targeted assassinations and the drone strikes on weddings. But I'm actually talking about something deeper than that. Not that all of those things don't matter, but rather that this is the belief that drives all of those things. People used to never say this out loud, although these days some people do. But it's the idea that in a war between a group of sophisticated, nuanced, high-minded thinkers and a bunch of violent, simple-minded, angry zealots, that the zealots will win. And that if we have any hope of surviving as a civilization, then we must become more zealous. Because, they say, imagine there's a battle about to happen between two factions, and on one side you have a group of college-educated people who constantly sit around and debate the nuance of the situation. They debate about whether or not war is even moral, or if their side even has a right to win. And then on the other side of the battle is a bunch of people with pure black and white thinking. We are the good and perfect angels. They are monsters. We are true human beings. They are something inhuman. They need to die. We need to survive. That in this battle, if you had to bet on who's going to win, that you would bet on the bloodthirsty, simple-minded zealots, and that the other side may decide not to fight at all, implying or outright saying that empathy is weakness, that nuance is cowardice, that if you want to win, you need to scrap all of that and go back to the simple black and white thinking, that dehumanization of the enemy is and always has been a superpower. It's the only thing that will let you win. That you can't sit around and ponder why 9/11 happened or where these groups came from or what motivated them or what came before that, any more than Batman can wait for a grand jury to make a decision before going after the Joker. And if you want to see a film that actually perfectly sums up this worldview, go watch the Zack Snyder film 300. And some people at the time said, yeah, it's clear what it's trying to symbolize. You have this vast horde of brown people and then a small heroic group of white people trying to stand up against them. But it's actually more than that. If you watch the film, it's not just that the Persian army is much bigger, but they're also much, much richer. They make a big deal that their leader is covered in gold chains. Meanwhile, the heroic Spartans have nothing. They've given up all creature comforts. They have stripped down their entire civilization to be just a fighting machine. They don't have equal rights in their civilization. They don't even allow the disabled to live. These guys don't sit around and debate whether or not violence is right. They don't have 1 ounce of self-doubt about whether or not their cause is just. They don't see the enemies as human, and that is all part of their superpower. With that mindset, this small group of soldiers, I don't remember exactly how many there were, are able to make their stand long enough to save civilization. And I think you could reasonably ask, what civilization were they trying to preserve? Almost every debate we have in politics or any kind of public policy is around this, around what is essentially a contradiction, because we are taught from the time we're in elementary school that part of the fundamental American project is that we don't see any humans as monsters. This is why every accused criminal gets a fair trial. This is why it's legal to write books, even if lots of people think they're garbage. This, they told us, is why we welcome immigrants. It's why we have that poem on the Statue of Liberty. Not just saying that we welcome everybody, no matter what you look like or where you came from, but specifically saying, send us your worst. Send us your poor, your refugees. That all of them are human. And they taught us in school, when we take POWs in war, we treat them well, we feed them, we give them medicine. Because not even the enemy are monsters. That even when we were taught about World War II, we were taught that the rank and file Nazis were just regular people who had been sucked into a terrible situation. That they had this utter nightmare of an economy and a social situation after World War I, and then this leader came along and just told them what they wanted to hear. All of the stuff they told us about America, all of the stuff we say on the 4th of July, only makes sense if we accept that no humans are monsters. And then at the exact same time, we constantly hear these other voices saying that if you want to preserve this, then you must win the war. And the only way to win the war is to think of the enemy as inhuman. And this paradox just keeps folding in on itself to the point that there's a huge section of the left that believes that fascists have taken over the government, and that something like 40% of the rank and file population are now fascists. And if you tell them that those people are actually human beings, they will say that you must be a fascist, because the only way to beat the fascists is to treat the fascists as inhuman monsters. You must deprive them of their humanity. It's not possible to win a war if you grant humanity to your enemy. It's not that both sides are the same. It's that everybody gets sucked into this exact same paradox, where they want to portray themselves as being the ones representing high-minded ideals and reason and science, that we are the forces beating back barbarism, that we are the ones that do not want to be dragged back into the age of ignorance, that we are the ones resisting the zealots, that we are the ones who don't succumb to this simple black and white thinking, which, by the way, every one of us knows is a fallacy. Because in our propaganda, we will describe certain people as being monsters, but the people we're describing as being monsters are our neighbors and our families, people we work with every day. And we're simultaneously saying that we are the ones standing against that kind of thinking, the kind of tribalism that threatens to destroy the world. But also, we secretly agree that dehumanization of the other side is a superpower and, in fact, is the only way to win. And if the core founding aspirational principles of America has been to resist that kind of thinking, well, then I guess that means that America just doesn't work. I went through all of this myself. I'm in no position to lecture anybody. I was 26 years old when 9/11 happened. I was at the apex of my angry young man stage. Not a lot of things were going right in my life. And man, when I watched that happen on TV at the office where I was working, it radicalized me. This is a matter of public record. You can go find my message board posts from the time. They're probably still out there. I heard people talking on the news about how we needed to send agents to go arrest bin Laden wherever he is and bring him to trial. And I was sickened by that. I did not want that to happen. I wanted them to kill everyone. At the office where I worked at the end of our shift, we all gathered around a flag to pray every night for several weeks after 9/11. We all taped little flags to our cubicles. If this technology had existed back then, if I'd had access to a camera and a microphone, I would have started the most ultra right-wing Twitch channel you've ever heard. Would probably have gotten really rich from it now that I think about it. But if I had to go back in time and talk to that zealous version of myself, I think what I would say is that what you are saying and thinking right now is extremely insulting toward the country you claim to love, the country that you claim you're doing all of this for. Because every word you say keeps portraying this country as fragile. That if a single public figure is allowed to come out and oppose the war, that somehow this will undermine everything, that the whole thing will collapse. That America actually can't withstand free speech or freedom of religion. That if people are allowed to protest the war, then that means we'll lose the war and our entire civilization will collapse. That just a bunch of people in the streets with signs, even that is enough to bring all of this down. That if you truly loved America and thought that it was the greatest and strongest and most powerful country in the world, that you would believe that it can withstand all of this. That it can withstand even these attacks. That if we'd wanted to, we could have shrugged this off. That the whole thing that you claim is admirable about the country and about its people is that they're willing to risk danger for freedom. That we are not a scared people. That anybody who is trying to make you afraid is trying to control you. They're trying to say, hey, there's so much disorder and chaos out there. You'd better give me all of the power so that I can protect you. That the people saying that are quintessentially un-American. That if you think you share the world with literal monsters, then already you're not free. You've already given up that ideal. Young Jason, I would say, the way you're acting and talking now, there are other people who think you're a monster. But looking back, I'm pretty sure I would not have listened because I don't doubt that people actually did say that to me at the time. Just as the people who most need to hear what I'm saying now also almost certainly won't hear it.